Now with fragments and portals, we had two cool features that help us write cleaner HTML code. The app worked in exactly the same way before we added those features too. But with those features, we end up with semantically more correct HTML code. And that's never a bad thing. Makes your app more accessible, makes sure you don't render unnecessarily many divs, and in general shows that you are a developer who knows what he's doing. Now let me move on to one last key feature which I also want to show you, which does something different than fragments and portals though. And that would be refs. References, but the name in React is just ref, so the short form of reference. What do refs do? Refs are actually quite powerful, as we will see throughout the course, but in their most basic form, they allow us to get access to other DOM elements and work with them. Now, what do I mean with that? Let's go to the add user component again. There we have our inputs, and we manage what the user enters by simply keeping track of it. We simply have our state, and with every keystroke, we update our state. So with every keystroke, we update the value we get by the user, and we store it in our state, and we feed that state back into the input, and we then use that state later on to reset the inputs, but also to send it to the place where we need the data. So that is a perfectly fine way of managing this. But updating the state with every keystroke, when we only need it when we submit the form, sounds a bit redundant to me. And that's a scenario where refs could help us, though they're not limited to that. I will already say that. How do refs work? With refs, we can set up a connection between a HTML element, which is being rendered in the end, and our other JavaScript code. And for that, we first of all need to create a ref, which we do with the help of another React hook. We use the useRef hook here, and we then simply call useRef here in our code, in our functional component. And like all React hooks, useRef is only usable inside of functional components. Now, what does useRef return and which value does it take? It takes a default value you want to initialize it to, but we don't need this here. But I'm very interested in what it returns, because it returns a value which allows us to work with that ref later. So which allows us to work with that element to which we're going to connect it. And therefore here I'll name this name input ref, because I plan on connecting this ref with that first input which allows us to enter a username. So here we have the name input ref. Now I'll duplicate this and create another ref by calling useRef again, and that will be my age input ref. So now I got two refs, and they're just sitting there doing nothing. They're initialized to be undefined, because that's the default, and they're useless. Now we can let React know that we want to connect a ref to a HTML element by going to that element to which we want to connect the ref, and adding a special prop there, the ref prop. Just like the key prop, that's a built-in prop which you can add to any HTML element. Because, and that's important, you can connect any HTML element to one of your references. You will very often do that for inputs, because you want to fetch input data, for example, but you can do it with any element. So here I got my ref, and now I will pass name input ref as a value here. And name input ref is just that constant which stores this first ref. So with that, I'm connecting this ref, which I created in this component, with that JSX code that is rendered by that same component. And now a connection will be established. The first time React reaches this code and renders this code, it will actually set the value stored in name input ref to the native DOM element that is rendered based on this input. And that's important. What will end up inside of name input ref in the end will really be a real DOM element later. So let's do the same for the age. And here I'll connect this to age input ref. And that's now connected as well. So now the refs are connected. What's the benefit? Let's go to our add user handler function, and after event prevent default, I want to console log my refs. Let's start with the name input ref. If I log this here and I go back and I go to the console so that I can see the log, if I submit this, you see there's an object being output here. There is an object being output here, and that object has a current property. Now, that's important. This ref value, which is being generated here, always is an object which always has a current prop, and the current prop holds the actual value that ref is connected with. Now, by default, it's undefined, but as soon as this code ran, because of this ref prop, the name input ref is connected to that input, and hence, it's actually the input which is being stored as a value in the current prop. And what's being stored here really is the actual DOM node. So not some theoretical value or anything like that, but the real DOM node, which you could now manipulate and do all kinds of things with. Now, it is recommended that you don't manipulate it. Your DOM should really only be manipulated by React. You're using React to let it do all the heavy lifting. But reading data from the input doesn't sound too bad, because you're not changing anything with that. You're just reading data. So here, instead of logging this here, we can, of course, read current value. Now, current refers to the value stored, and the value stored is the input element, and every input element has a value property in JavaScript. We can actually see this here. There's the value property. So if I now save this and I log this value, if I enter max here, you see max being logged here. And that's pretty cool, because that means we can get access to the value stored in the element without having to log every keystroke. We don't need state for this. We can just read it when the submit button is pressed. So that means we could now replace console log maybe with a helper constant, which we use inside of add user handler. I'll name that constant entered name and simply store my current value in that. And I do the same for the age. I add my entered age and store age input ref.current.value. Now, entered age clashes with my state here, so therefore I'll pick a slightly different name. I'll use entered user age here. Now we can check entered name here and entered user age here, and also entered user age here in this condition. So always the values we retrieved from the refs. And I also use entered name here and entered user age to submit it to on add user. Now with that, of course, we should no longer reset these inputs by resetting the state here though, because we're not using the state to get our values anymore. We currently still have those listeners, but we actually now don't really need those values anymore. We're using refs to get the values. So what we could do is we could get rid of these states here. So of these states where we listen to every keystroke. Therefore, get rid of these state updating functions and get rid of these two handlers. And also get rid of the value property and the onChange property on the inputs. With that, we shortened that code quite a bit, and we're relying on refs to read the values. Hence, if I add max 31, you see we still can add that user. However, during the process, we lost our resetting logic. Now, to bring it back, we got two options. We can switch back to the state-based solution, which is not bad, but I want to show refs here. Or we do something which you should rarely do, but which actually is okay here in the context of an input field value which you want to reset. You can manipulate the DOM without React. And yes, I said you shouldn't do that. You typically shouldn't do that. But if you just want to reset the value entered by a user, it is something you can consider doing. So we could use the name input ref dot current dot value and now set it to an empty string and repeat this for the age input ref. And with these two lines added here, if we now check this again, you see now it's cleared. Again, rarely do that. Rarely use refs to manipulate the DOM. Here, we're not really manipulating the DOM, we're not adding a new element or changing a CSS class. I'm just changing what the user entered. You could argue that you don't even want to do that, and in that case, you can always return back to the state-based solution, but I think it's fine. Now, in general, the question is not whether refs or state is better. You can use either of the two. You will sometimes have use cases where you just want to quickly read a value, for example. And if you only want to read a value and you never plan on changing anything, well, then you don't really need state. Because just to use state as a keylogger is not that great. It's a lot of unnecessary code and work. So if you just want to read a value, refs are probably better. In scenarios like this, it's up to you what you prefer. Refs, which are a little bit less code, but you have this edge case of manipulating the DOM, or state, which is definitely cleaner, but is a bit more code. It's up to you, but we'll see refs throughout this course, and you will see them in a lot of projects, in a lot of React projects, because getting access to elements is quite convenient. And as I said, they can even do a bit more than that, but we'll see them again throughout the course. This is just an introduction, and this is all you need to know about refs right now.